First puzzle, threats in puzzle position are: rook takes pawn, queen takes pawn, queen takes knight, queen takes pawn, check, queen takes rook, check. Here are checks in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn, check, queen to e1, check, queen to d1, check, queen takes rook, check. The best move in puzzle position is bishop to e3, king to h1, queen to e2, rook to e1, queen to f3, check, king to g1, rook takes pawn. Let's see the next puzzle. The threats are: queen takes rook, queen takes knight, queen takes pawn, check. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn, check, queen to b1, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Knight to f8, knight takes rook, knight takes rook, queen to g5, queen takes knight. Another one. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Rook takes pawn, queen takes knight, bishop takes knight. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using bishop takes knight, queen to e5, queen to b8, queen takes bishop, bishop to c3. Next puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn, check, queen takes pawn, rook takes rook, check, bishop takes pawn. Here are checks in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn, check, rook takes rook, check. The best move in puzzle position is queen takes pawn, rook takes rook, queen to h7, check, king to f8, bishop to g6, queen to a7, pawn takes rook. Next puzzle. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Queen takes knight, check. Checks in puzzle position are: queen to h6, check, queen to g7, check, queen to f6, check, queen takes knight, check, g7, check, rook to f2, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Queen to h7, bishop to e6, bishop to b5, queen takes pawn, check, rook takes queen. Another one. Here are the threats. Pawn takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. Answer to this puzzle is h3, g4, pawn takes pawn. One more. Here are threats in puzzle position. Queen takes rook, check, queen takes pawn, rook takes pawn, check. Checks in puzzle position are: queen to a7, check, queen takes rook, check, rook takes pawn, check. Solution to the puzzle is: queen to a7, check, rook to b7, rook takes pawn, check, rook to c6, queen to a5, check, rook to b6, rook takes rook, check. Let's see the next puzzle. Here are the threats. Rook takes bishop, bishop takes pawn, check, knight takes pawn, queen takes pawn, check. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Bishop takes pawn, check, knight to f3, check, knight to d3, check, queen takes pawn, check, queen to b1, check. Answer to this puzzle is: rook takes bishop, pawn takes rook, bishop takes pawn, check, queen takes bishop, queen to e4, check, king to d2, queen takes pawn, check, king to c2, queen takes rook. Next, let us look at threats in puzzle position. Pawn takes knight, rook takes pawn. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Queen to b8, check, queen to e5, check, queen to h8, check. The puzzle is solved using queen to h8, check, king to e7, pawn takes knight, rook to f4, check, king to e2. Let's continue. Here are the threats. Queen takes pawn, check, queen takes pawn. The checks are: queen to f7, check, queen takes pawn, check, queen to c4, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Queen to c4, check, king to h8, queen to f7, rook to g8, rook to e8, queen to d1, check, king to g2, queen to d5, check, queen takes queen. One more. The threats are: bishop takes pawn, bishop takes knight, check, knight takes pawn, bishop takes pawn. The checks are: h6, check, bishop takes knight, check. The answer is bishop takes knight, check. Bishop takes bishop. h6, check. King to g8. Bishop takes pawn, check. King takes bishop. Queen takes bishop.
Another puzzle.
Threats in puzzle position are: bishop takes pawn, check. Bishop takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes bishop. Queen takes bishop. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Rook takes bishop.
Let us look at checks in puzzle position.
Bishop takes pawn, check. Bishop to h7, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Bishop to h7, check. King to h8. Queen takes bishop. One more.
Let us look at threats in puzzle position.
Queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn. Knight takes pawn, check.
Here are the checks.
Queen to f6, check. Queen to d8, check. Knight takes pawn, check. Solution to the puzzle is: rook to d1. Rook takes knight. Queen takes rook. One more.
Let us look at threats in puzzle position.
Queen takes knight. Rook takes pawn. Rook takes rook, check. Rook takes pawn.
Here are the checks.
Rook takes rook, check. The best move in puzzle position is
g4.
Rook takes rook. Pawn takes knight. Rook to c3. Queen to g4. Rook takes pawn. Rook takes rook. Next, puzzle position vulnerabilities are: queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn. Rook takes bishop.
Checks in puzzle position are:
queen takes pawn, check. The answer is queen to f5. Rook to g8. Rook to e2. Queen to f6. Queen takes queen. Pawn takes queen. Rook takes bishop. Let's see the next puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. Rook takes knight. Pawn takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn, check. Queen takes bishop.
Let us look at checks in puzzle position.
Bishop takes pawn, check. Solution to the puzzle is: knight to d5. Knight takes bishop. Queen takes bishop. Pawn takes queen. Knight to f6, check. King to h8. Bishop to g7, check. King takes bishop. Knight takes rook, check. King to g8. Knight takes queen. Another one. Here are the threats. Bishop takes knight. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes knight. King takes knight.
Here are the checks.
Bishop to d7, check. Bishop to f7, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen to h5, check. The best move in puzzle position is queen to h5, check. King to f8. Bishop to h6. Knight takes pawn, check. Bishop takes knight. Let us go to the next puzzle. The threats are: rook takes pawn. Rook takes knight. Pawn takes knight. Pawn takes knight. Queen takes pawn, check.
Checks in this position are:
queen to h2, check. Queen to h1, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Solution to the puzzle is: pawn takes knight. Queen to f1. Rook to f6.
g3.
Queen to h7. Let us go to the next puzzle. The threats are: bishop takes pawn, check. Queen takes bishop. Queen takes pawn.
Here are checks in puzzle position.
Rook to d1, check. Rook to e1, check. Bishop takes pawn, check. Solution to the puzzle is: g6. Bishop to g5. Queen to e5. Bishop takes rook. Pawn takes rook.
Another puzzle.
The threats are: queen takes knight.
There are no checks in this position.
Here is the solution to the puzzle. King to h1. Queen to f5. Bishop to c2. Bishop to a4. Bishop takes queen. Bishop takes queen. Rook takes bishop. Rook to b2. Knight to f6, check.
Another puzzle.
Threats in this position are: pawn takes pawn.
There are no checks in this position.
The puzzle is solved using: pawn takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn. King to f5. King to e3.
d5.
King to f3. King to g5. One more. Threats in this position are: knight takes pawn. Queen takes knight. Queen takes bishop, check.
Here are checks in puzzle position.
Queen to d6, check. Queen takes bishop, check. Solution to the puzzle is: Queen to d6, check. King takes knight.
b5,
Check. King takes pawn. Queen to d5, check. King to b4. Rook to b8, check. King to a3. Rook to b3, check. Pawn takes rook. Queen takes pawn, checkmate. Let's continue. Threats in puzzle position are: rook takes bishop. Knight takes bishop. Pawn takes bishop.
Here are checks in puzzle position.
Queen to h2, check. The puzzle is solved using: knight takes bishop. Knight takes knight. Queen to c6. Next, puzzle position vulnerabilities are: there are no threats in this position.
Checks in puzzle position are: d4,
Check. Answer to this puzzle is: king to e5. King to d3. King to f4. King to d4. King to g3. King takes pawn. King takes pawn. King to c5. King takes pawn. King takes pawn. King to f5.
c4.
King to e6. Another one. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are: rook takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. Rook takes knight. Bishop takes pawn, check. Bishop takes knight.
The checks are:
Bishop takes pawn, check. The best move in puzzle position is: bishop takes knight. Pawn takes bishop. Rook takes pawn. Rook takes rook. Bishop takes rook, check. King to f8. Bishop takes rook.
Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.